Okay, so sorry for this. So I think it happens to all. I was expecting to finalize the meeting at 11, and I just finalized 2 minutes before this meeting. Okay. Hope everything is working well for you, so you can see my screen. Let's now talk about um, sharing and publishing research data. Um, this is a topic I think quite important and critical, based on everything what you, in fact, I suppose you discussed today about fair data, ways to share and publish research data, make our life easier to comply with the fair data principles, and also based on what we discussed yesterday and presented yesterday during the first presentation about your role, about the open science landscape, about the funder policies and requirements. So publishing, sharing research data is really critical here. So this is what we want to highlight. So first, then, like an introduction to several concepts that I think are important to take into consideration when we talk about archiving, sharing and publishing data, and where then a second part about where to deposit, where to publish research data, and check some generic services and tools, some examples with some with some demos I think are important for us to do. Feel free to stop to ask questions. So in each topic, I will stop for questions, but mm, feel free to stop me and to ask questions. So let me share also. Let me share the slides here. Okay, feel free to check the slides. I put it in the chat. Okay. Um, so I keep this links here from let's say some highlights from my background. Anna already presented me yesterday, but things that I'm presenting here, I my knowledge came from the fact that I was in charge of the support materials in the open science infrastructure open air. I was part of also building some training courses in Foster, and I was part of First Fair. So several things here come from this background. I'm not directly from life sciences, so um, so that knowledge I don't have. I have other capabilities, and I can identify some resources from life sciences to you, but then the rest I cannot do it, and you may do it. Were you able to so is the slides available for you? Someone? Okay, perfect. Okay. So let's start with some like introductory concepts. So this is critical in the concept of open science. I will not spend time with that, and I just want to highlight that when we talk about, I just put this slide in order for me to avoid forget this. When we talk about sharing and publishing research data, we should clearly think that. We talk about also other kinds of resource outputs. So when we talk about open science, I think yesterday Eloy presented. So we talk about results and process and methods. And in the results area, it's not only about publications or literature. It's also about research data, software, and other kinds of artifacts of research products. And this is critical and comes into publishing research data, because we may also talk about the code attached to some data sets, some methods or workflows. So we need also to consider that, and I think this will be visible in some of my presentations. So some of the content I will present. Um, and when we talk about these three concepts: archiving, sharing, and publishing. We are talking about managing data, and managing data is just preparing properly the data within the research life cycle. And I always like to present this image when it concerns to data, because we are talking about a component, a quite important component that um, in some research processes are like we have it here. Some data sets are in fact the eggs, but in some other cases, in fact, the 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 data we may publish is ready to be consumed and to be presented. So we need also to look to the data in different perspectives, on not only in what this image represents, but so also in different ways, because we now have also different ways to publish data. Like we have data papers, we have software papers, which are interesting ways also to represent and to publish data. Consider that we are talking about publishing and sharing data that will make our life easier when it comes to compliance with the fair data principles. Of course, we can say that it's more easy for the F and A and a bit for the reusable, but uh, preparing data to share, preparing data to publish is also doing a process of compliance with fair data, I think. I would like to have joined the part of the course that Danielle did about the fair data, but I was not able. But I suppose that this is clear now for you. And all these components of sharing on publishing is quite critical in the process of data management. In this critical for several funders, as stated here in this policy statements from Research Council UK or from NWO from the Netherlands, and also preparing data to make sure that we proper archive, we proper publish is also a very good contribution to good practices in terms of research data management within the process. So if we think that we want to attach research a specific data set to a publication, to an article, we want to publish in a repository that the research data from as an output from a research project. In the process, we will for sure prepare the data proper, document the data proper, ensure the backup and preservation policies that are needed. So this is a cycle that everything is I think correlated. And this part of publishing is critical when it comes to funders, because but it's not the main reason. It should not be the main reason, but funders are requiring data to be available, share it in a way, publish publicly available, or just to the world knows that the data exists. So the metadata is available, and the data sets, the files are maybe have a restricted access, or different kinds of approach. So as open as possible, as closely as necessary, as uh, was mentioned yesterday also. To finish this introductory part, just to go deeper into the publishing, managing data in a proper way, trying also to prepare it for the sharing part and the publishing part is 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 really important. So it will for sure make our life easier. This is important. I think this will what this course will highlight. Having the proper policies in terms of backups, archiving will for sure save the data for later. Um, Proper document data, attach right licenses, will make our life easier in terms of sharing data for reuse, to make it reproducible. Publishing data in repositories with the right licenses is also a possibility to be cited, not only our publications but also the data that we publish, and so get credit for it. I really believe that the evaluation, the assessment of researchers' career will change sooner than we think. In some countries is already, in some European countries, in fact, things are already changing in terms of university career assessment. In Portugal, I believe that this will also change, and maybe data data sets available publicly, and the credit for that data will also count for the assessment in the near future. And of course, these good practices in terms of documenting data and making data available as open as possible, as closed as necessary, will avoid also accusations of fraud or bad science, and will make our life also easier for that part. And of course, we will meet funder requirements or institutional requirements. We will comply with those requirements more easily. So the publishing and archiving and sharing is part of the research data lifecycle, embedded in the research lifecycle. When we think of providing access, like we have here in this component, we need to prepare the data in advance. We need to proper document the data. In the process of creating data or gathering data, generating data, we need to think about the way that we want to give access to data. So we need also to proper to have to consider in our consent forms the way that we want to share the data, to open the data from our research project. So in different steps, in different phases of the research data life cycle, of the research life cycle, we need to consider components of that part of publishing and sharing data, which is really important. So I just want to highlight in this first part that publishing and sharing is not only a part at the end of the process. It should be considered in the different stages of the research data life cycle, because this will influence the way that we are able to share, or the way that we can easily without strong barriers to make data publicly available, or publish the data. Okay, so now specifically for the content of this model, what is the difference between these three concepts, and I will highlight the sharing and the publishing ones. So when we talk about share, it's a way of sharing data. Okay, it's not making data open or with an open license. So it's not automatically download the data available in the repository. It's a way to share data. So to make it findable and accessible in a certain way. Of course, it could mean I mail the data, but of course it could mean that I put the data in a specific repository and I make it restricted, and the metadata is open, but the files are only downloadable by request, etc. Publish is different. Is making it clearly discoverable by the world. Is making the data citable, and even we can publish data with restrictions, with specific terms of use, with some attached access rights. That don't mean that they are completely like CC0 and full open license. And then archive is for long-term preservation. The long-term in some cases means 10 years, in other cases means less or a bit more, depends of some of the institutional policies. When it comes to publish and share data, it's important for us to understand the different levels of this. I built this graphic based on some other outputs from some colleagues, but I start building this graphic that I'm now will present. But when I start doing presentations about the Horizon 2020 requirements from the European Commission, because all researchers, when I start presenting the requirements, they all asked me, so the European Commission want my raw data. Why they want my raw data? And I said, no, they don't want your raw data. They want the data that is attached to publications that you think that are important to put it to share it in a way or to publish the data. They don't want your raw data. So I start preparing this graphic that I hope that is also important for you to clearly to clarify what we are talking about. And I think this is important when we provide support to researchers. So we have the raw data, and in the raw data, we have processed data. And in fact, in some of the analyzed or processed data, there are inconclusive results. And then part of this, the processed data, the data that is already analyzed, we have data that we may want to share with our colleagues, to share with our research group, to share with other colleagues from other institutions or from other countries that are part of my research group or that I want to collaborate with or for different reasons. And we are talking about shared data, not about open data yet. And then some part of this shared data we may want to put publicly available, so open data. So this is, I think this representation is really important because we always talk about two things. So the principle as stated in the Horizon 2020 or now in Horizon Europe, as open as possible, as closed as necessary. There are reasons to keep data closed. And then also a certain period for me as a researcher to explore the potential of my data. So I don't want to put all my raw data available because I spend a lot of time to produce this data, to gather this data, and I don't want to make it publicly available. I need some time to process the data, to check if I can find other conclusions, to work with my colleagues in my institution to produce more results, this kind of thing. So when we think about sharing and publishing, we need to have this visual here in our mind. So we are not talking about publishing raw data. We can do it. So considering to publish raw data, it only makes sense when it comes to open data gov. So when we have a mandate in our organization as a public administration body, that we should make the data, the raw data, available for the world. And in some situations, in fact, there are research data that is open data gov, characterized as open data gov data, but we are not talking about this today. So the raw data needs time to be explored. Then there are some parts of the raw data processing that I start developing conclusions, working to publish things about that, to representing reports, to publish articles, to publish even as a data paper. And then, yes, I can share the data, attach it to publications, deposited in repositories, share the data with my peers. And then also some of the data that I am sharing with my peers or publishing in repositories, I can make it completely open to the world, let's say, with taking into consideration all the legal restrictions and ethical issues that we may have, and taking into consideration that I can manage different access levels. So there is usually in the different tools and services available to publish data, I can do it in a closed way, restricted by password or by IP address, etc. Publish it completely open with some embargo period for some reason, and in a open way, let's say. So this is important to consider. So feel free to ask questions if you have. Okay. So when it comes to this diagram will be also important for other parts of this presentation. Okay, just before we move to the second part, giving access to data. So let's talk about to avoid the words sharing and publishing. We can talk about different stages and different kinds of access. Not all uh, data that I want to publish is to make it publicly available, so we can publish the metadata and keep the files closed, or embargoed. Uh, we can also make different kinds of access rights, as I already told, but also different kinds of licenses to for the data to be consumed or reused. And we can also promote the data in different places. In social media, we can also do it, but we can also publish it as a data paper, or we can publish the data as a supplementary material for a journal article, or just the data set itself linking to link it to an article, or I can publish my data from the PhD thesis, which is critical. We lose a lot of data from the PhD thesis for sure in the world, but in Portugal for sure, because considering the work that we do managing publications repositories, we realize this problem of the data from PhD thesis, for example. And giving access to data is not only publishing data in repositories, it is also sharing the data with collaborators, depending on the tools that we have available with different research participants, and sometimes with commercial partners, because we may have requests from commercial entities asking us studies, and we are producing the data needed for them, and we can work with them and share the data with commercial partners, and of course using also a data repository. That is what I'm going to highlight. And as I stated in the beginning, this introductory part, just to, it was it may be a little bit complicated to share all the data management life cycle, but it's important to consider that we need to have a plan for sharing that in fact includes some decisions already in the process of creating the data, the process of planning my project, my research project, or at more at the part of publishing just directly in the repository. So we need to identify the data that we want to collect. We may want to consider some constraints and limitations in the consent form, or if we want to use personal data or not. Do we really need to collect some personal data in some of the, the data that we collect? Sometimes this is more critical for social sciences, but I think it's for all. So sometimes we are doing surveys, for example. It's always the best example for this, and we ask personal data, but we don't use it for the analysis. So we are collecting data that we are going, it's not relevant for the research, but then we have a problem because we need to anonymize that information, and will make our life more difficult. So we need to have a plan for sharing. Yesterday already, it was already mentioned in the data management planning model, and for sure also it was important to consider also in the principles of fair data. So you will have other models to talk about privacy, data protection, informed consents, etc. But be sure that when we are talk about sharing and publishing data, and this slide is just to avoid that I receive questions for you about but I cannot publish this specific data because there is personal or privacy information, or because and there is security, national security issues or something like that. So there are constraints. So we need to consider um, ethics in this process, and we need also to document and to have a process in order to proper ensure informed consent in our research process. So this is also important for this sharing planning, this sharing plan, and this is needed when we think about publishing and sharing and even archiving data. So these are important components. Okay, so I finished this first part, and I would like now to entering in on the practical part, where to publish data, what are the possibilities, the ways to publish data. But if you have any question, feel free to to ask something. Okay, I suppose you will. I suppose you are tired from these two mornings. But if you have any question, I just stop sharing the screen just to change a bit the screen. But I will continue. I can start with this presentation of the. If you have questions, you can type it, or you can just interrupt me, and I will reply. Okay. Let me change. Let me also put a screen. Okay. 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 So let's continue. If you don't have questions, so where to deposit and publish research data? I will highlight some ways to do that. Publishing data is quite critical. So we really need to make data more prominent in the central stage. There is this statement from Nature. Nature materials. This have early 2020 updated their data policy, and they wrote an editorial titled "Data Take Center Stage." Data is really prominent in some of the data availability policies from the journals, editors, and also from the funders, as we see also here the statement from Horizon 2020. And we really need to ensure that the role is more prominent in our research group, in our institutions. This is really critical. So that I ensure good data management practices in order to make my life easier when it comes to publish. I deposit data in trusted repositories with persistent identifiers, with digital object identifiers. For example, this is critical when it comes to publish data. These two concepts. So find a repository that I can trust, and I will talk about that, and in deposit data or publish data with a digital object identifier or other kinds of persistent identifier. This is critical. The other critical thing is also that I can associate my data, my research data sets with publications that I made available, with thesis, PhD thesis, as I mentioned, or with articles. That is more common. And when I have a project, I can also present not only the outputs, the published outputs in terms of literature, but also the data sets. This is quite important. Okay. Where to deposit or to publish? We have different ways. Let's say that the research data repository is the right way to do it, but let's see where should I publish the data. We have one or two more. We'll highlight it at the end, but to simplify, we put it in these four pillars. So as supplementary material in some of the journal services that are available. Okay, and this is common for some of you. With this, we can easily meet publisher requirements. We can make data available close to the published outputs. Okay, but there are some cons. So we can see it here in red. It can be costly, or we can risk a bit the data rights. We can pass some of the data rights. We may pass some of the data rights to the journal service. It depends of the policies they have. And the journal don't have clearly a preservation policy, so we are not sure if we are insured at the same time that I'm publishing, if we are ensuring a kind of preservation of my materials. So just really to meet the requirements of the publisher. We go into detail of each of these pillars, but we have also the possibility to use an institutional data repository, which is something that is not common in Portugal. In the University of Minho, we have an institutional data repository that we already only presented in 2020. But in some other universities we may have, and there is also a national initiative also to build and to provide a data repository for institutions in Portugal. Let's see how it evolves. So if you have an institutional repository, usually it accepts various types of data. Of course, it's more reliable for costs because it's an institutional service to follow some policies, but one of the more critical issues of the institutional data repositories is that usually they are more generic, like agnostic to discipline specific descriptions, so it's more poor for specific disciplines. It's not an institutional, the repository is not equal to poor metadata, so we can have rich metadata, but in some cases they are not so rich as some of the disciplinary repositories. You may have also find generic repositories. Usually we call it catch-all repositories or hybrid repositories that are for different kinds of discipline domain research data, but also for different kinds of research outputs in the same place. You can deposit a publication, a data set, an audio file, a video file, a graphic, a diagram, a report, so etc. There are several examples. In some of these services, you can reach a wider audience. It's interesting to have in the same place a collection with all the publications plus the data, etc. It's interesting, but usually this type of services that I will also present some don't have an editorial validation process, which means that the quality is not so there are risks that to considering the quality of the metadata, for example. And there are disciplinary repositories that of course are the natural place to put some data, have more detail in terms of metadata, offer expertise and experience in data curation. Usually they accept complete data sets or specific data sets from specific instruments or fields, etc. But usually there are some limitations in terms of the type of data that is accepted. And usually they are not. We need to comply with some rules, some standards, and it's not so automatic or easy as it to use an institutional or generic repository. So in green and red, I highlighted some pros and cons of using one of these ways to publish data. Now let's go into some examples, details. Feel free to ask questions or to give other examples that you may consider useful. Please be aware that there are authoritative directories already. Re3 data is a world data repositories directory where you can find information from institutional discipline specific repositories. It's really, if you don't know, if you didn't visit yet this resource, you will be surprised by the number of repositories registered there, some databases, repositories, data archives from specific disciplines, or data repositories from specific institutions are registered in Re3 data. Fair sharing, that initially was only a project from life sciences. Now it's beyond the life sciences, but it's quite interesting resource for you. Fair sharing is also now a register for data repositories, for databases. It's not only registered for that; it's also registered for policies, for standards. But you can also find here databases and the data archives and data repositories registered in fair sharing, which I think is really interesting for your specific area. Um, and you should consider to visit and explore a bit this resource. Let's talk about journal service for supplementary material, this way of sharing data. So we are talking about, usually we are talking about the fact that publishers, editors have data availability policies, and usually within the presentation of these data availability policies, they present uh, suggestions of repositories, or they ask you to comply with a way to um, publish supplementary material. Depends of the reality. If we are talking about, for example, if frontiers, you can have specific journals to publish the supplementary material, like a PDF with more details about the images that you have embedded in the article. In some other policies, they will only ask for the data available in a specific repository. So different policies for different editors, different journals. It's changing a lot. This reality, if you look to policies over the last 3 years, is evolving a lot, and with lots of different requirements over the last 2 3 years. It's an example here from PLOS computational biology, for example, where they clearly state that they have a policy in order to ensure the best data management practices. They want they have these data availability policies to ensure reproducibility, to ensure that the data is properly archived and licensed, and they have the policy also to validate the results presented in the articles. Okay, and then they suggest, if you look to this policy, they also suggest a set of repositories where you that you can use to deposit and publish your data. What are the type of policies that the publishers have? Usually, it's three types of policies. Let's say, to simplify. Some publishers ask the authors to send the data set to the publisher for a specific service via email as a supplementary material, so different ways. Some publishers ask the author to deposit in a trusted repository based on a list, or just pointing to Re3 data. If a repository is listed in Re3 data, you can use it. And some others also are more like flexible, and they just ask the contact. So if a reviewer of a paper or someone in the editorial board want to have access to the data, they will contact, okay, a specific person that you give the contact information. So these are the three scenarios, types of policies that usually the publishers have. This is quite well documented usually the data in the journal's website, etc. But it's important to highlight. So this is a kind of alert that using specific data repositories or specific services from the publishers, it may be not the best solution to ensure that you have the full control of your data sets. Okay, some of you are aware that we lose a bit the control of the publications. Now we need to pay to publish and to pay to access. And until now, we have the control of our research data. Not sure if we start giving the data to the publishers, if we will not entering into the same situation of losing the control of the research data as we also did for publication. But this is a personal comment. Second way, institutional data repositories. If you go to Re3 Data, you will find different types of institutional data repositories, from non-profit organizations, etc. Universities have, there are some also national facilities in some countries, even in Europe. And this is a very interesting solution to ensure that we keep the data in our institution to be reused by our researchers. Even if a researcher produces data and now it's not working anymore for the institution, we keep the data in our institution for upcoming research projects or for other researchers that will join the team. And also to comply with some of the policies that the institution may have. Okay, and this is a very, very good solution. Usually we talk about institutional data repository as a facility, as a last resource. Let's say we can say that it's more natural to have the data deposited in domain specific repositories because it's more natural to have it there. But the institutional repository is a facility for those that don't have a specific data repository, or for data that don't fit to the requirements of a specific disciplinary repository. We have a place for them to store the data. Usually it's more for the long tail of data. Okay. And I have another picture here to better represent this idea of, because we usually there are a big amount of data that have a place that have a place to be stored. Usually big data are part of strong and robust research infrastructures, and then we have all the rest, thousands and thousands of projects. It's not big data, it's hundreds and hundreds of data sets that are part of those projects that don't have that are often of a place to be stored. So this is why institutional data repository is interesting for PhD thesis, for different kinds of research outputs from strong research projects in our institutions. We may encounter it as a facility for these institutional data repositories. There are different reasons of why to use a data repository. This is an infographic produced in the RDM Portuguese RDM forum that I also advise you to follow. This RDM national initiative. It's in Portuguese, this infographic, highlighting 10 reasons to deposit data in repositories, in institutional repositories. You can check it after. And to finish just this second way, just to highlight that there are also different solutions, commercial and open source solutions. The common open source solutions to build a data and institutional data repositories are the following: 4: Dataverse, CCAN, DSpace, Invenio. There are other solutions. In the University of Minho, we decided to use Dataverse, but there are other solutions also using different kinds of software platforms to build an institutional repository. Generic repositories, there are several. Maybe you know these logos: Figshare, Dryad, Zenodo. Even Dataverse is a repository and also a hosted service. So you can find it. They have for free a limited space, and then you pay to deposit more data. But so they're very good solutions. If you don't have an institutional repository, if you don't have a place to store the data in your specific domain, be sure that there are already solutions that you can use. A researcher in Portugal, if they don't have a solution in the institution, they can use, for example, Zenodo or Figshare quite easily. Okay, and then there are the disciplinary repositories. Okay, this slide is broken. I don't know why. Oops, I stopped sharing. I didn't want to stop sharing. Sorry. Just want to. Can you see my screen? Yes. Okay, disciplinary repositories. You find several examples here from your specific area, from the specific area of this of biodata, available also in Elixir Europe. It's important to check for disciplinary repositories in the directories that I already mentioned, and there are different data sets that are that we can use to deposit in different kinds of services. Bioimage archive is here, biostudies. There are different solutions for different kinds of data that several researchers from Portugal are in fact using when they need to publish and they need to 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 check compliance of data that they are producing, etc. So they can deposit here. So please check the Elixir information. I think it's important. I will not go into detail because it's not my specific area, but for sure you have researchers here with a very good knowledge and experience in using some of the tools that I already presented, and this information about the core data resources or the repositories or databases to deposit data is quite well documented in Elixir Europe website. And I will not detail this, but I don't know if then someone wants to talk about, because I don't have knowledge. So biodata is also, I have also a solution. Not sure if it is in a beta stage, a pilot stage, but biodata also have a solution to store data that maybe this course will be also interesting to test it and to spread the word maybe. But I'm just highlighting this. To finalize this part, what is important here to consider? So I highlighted 4 ways to deposit the data. So the publishers, the institutional repositories, generic repositories, or disciplinary repositories. But what is important to consider that we need to see that the repositories, these solutions are trustful. Okay, so pay attention to that. So there are different initiatives to certify repositories. Repositories can apply to get some kind of seal of approval for the quality of this data source. So there are the core trust seal, Nestor seal. There are compatibility with some ISO related with the preservation, etc. So some of these, let's say, certifications are already part of some of the repositories that are institutional, domain specific, or generic. The core trust seal is the one that is in a kind of expansion period. The repository need to apply for this certification. Is something between like 6 months to 1 year to get the badge, the process approved. But there are different ways. This information is quite well documented in the directories, so you can see that if the repositories have a certificate or not. There are different kinds of certificates. Also, some specific area also provide certificates. and in re3 data, and a bit also in fair sharing, this information is quite well presented, but better in re3 data because they have really a specific field to represent the data. And user can see this icon here of the seal represents, if it is red, represents if the research data have a certification or not. Plus, okay, just to finalize, there are these 4 ways, but it's important also to mention, I need to update that slide with the 4 pillars to integrate also the data papers. There are also data papers, which is interesting. They are increasing some areas, and in fact, in life sciences, there are already some data papers available. I don't have a full knowledge of that, but so data papers, journals where we publish data as an article, let's say, patterns. MDPI also have journal to publish data papers. So there are different solutions being already used, which is interesting. We can also use a data paper, publish the data in a data paper, and link to a full set of files available in the repository. You can do this. Usually we do this, but you can only use the specific data paper to publish data. So this is important to say. And there is also the same for software. Okay, there are already also software paper journals. We are not talking here to talk today about to detail the data, the software requirements, let's say, and needs. But so when we talk about research outputs, there are publications, research data, and also software is important. In some cases, is more important than the rest. But it's important also to mention that it's something new, but there are already some software paper journals. Okay, so questions about these 4 types of publishing and sharing data before I give some demos using 2 services. Questions? We are all tired from lunch, but it was clear for you. Yes, please.
So just 2 or 3 comments, I guess, not entire questions, but maybe just to promote some discussion. And taking into account the red flags that are in each pillar. So let's, I would suggest to go to the institutional data repository. So when you mention may not offer long-term sustainability access, so what are you thinking about? So the institution does not have a long-term project in that sense? Is it
yes,
different?
I based it. Yes, I based it. This I read 2 or 3 studies that mentioned that in some institutions the repository is not completely placed in a policy, okay, in a strategy, in a roadmap of the institution for research data management, and we may not offer long-term sustainability access. So, but which is not the case for example, when we thought about our data repository in University of Minho, is really to ensure that this is a place to preserve data, but there are some limitations, technically speaking, and then in terms of governance, let's say. So in some examples that I found, this is why I tried to gather this information. This is critical because if the repository is just a resource available, not embedded in a strategy, an institutional strategy for research data management, this is critical. No, I think you understand that.
Yeah, sure. And the other one. So as far as I understand, so the metadata should be paired with the data. So I'm not sure if I understand the why is it a key feature for the repository to have disciplinary metadata? So if the metadata is paired with a specific dataset, why does the repository has to have this kind of disciplinary metadata. So is it something like to have an interface and to automatically go and get some metadata and present it beautifully to in the interface?
Yes, beautiful to the interface so it's good to have more metadata that represents that specific data set, but also for machine readable, so
Okay.
for interoptional. So because it's completely different. If we compare, for example, these two examples that I want to highlight after this presentation, if we compare Zenodo, for example, let's see if this is a data set. Um, this is a software record. No problem. But, so we have specific metadata. This is a generic repository that we have that we can represent. So you don't have a specific fields to represent the specific information. If you have a repository with specific metadata, which is an institutional repository, but I will demonstrate this just for you to so highlight. Let's see if I can use this example to clearly exemplify. This is a record in our repository in the University of Minho, and when it comes to these are the fields, all the fields from a generic perspective metadata. Title, subtitle, you can have authors, IDs of the authors, the description, subject, keywords, related publication, so citation metadata, let's say. Then you can improve the description with some specific metadata. For example, let's open the live section. So you can, it's not a lot, but you can make additional, so about organism or factor type or cell type, you can increase the information that this is not from a generic standard. Okay, in generic standard is just the representation of the digital object. Then you can have specific metadata to represent the digital object with some information from that specific discipline. In this software platform that we use in Minho, the Dataverse, there are some default metadata discipline specific metadata to improve the description. But we are talking about this. It's not it's not a lot, but it's something that will improve the representation of the information. It was clear for you, Bruno?
Yeah. So it's not exactly the same as the metadata that is paired with the data. So it's kind of an header for the dataset in that sense.
Yes, it's a
Okay.
it's a representation of the yes, it's true.
So that then you will have to have the the files of with the metadata that clearly describe the data, so using Dublin Core or Darwin Core, something like that, and using ontologies. This is not that metadata. This is kind of the metadata representing the data set and not the data itself. And this will help to index the data sets and Google allow to Google it and something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
But
okay,
it can
perfect.
be also but it can also be some more information about the data set, some of the information that you gave. So we can also consider Darwin as a specific metadata that we can improve. So we have the generic metadata, and then we can integrate the Darwin standard and the detail for that specific community, let's say, if they
okay
wish.
okay.
And usually for generic and for institutional repositories, it's difficult to manage all the different standards that we have to improve the representation. In this platform, for example, we call it citation metadata, discipline metadata, and journal metadata. So citation and journal is easy to identify. Then we can integrate different kinds of discipline specific metadata to improve the discoverability, the description of the data.
Okay, I'm seeing that Inês also has a
Yes,
question.
please.
Yeah, I have a question about this repository of menu.
Yes.
So I don't maybe I don't understand, or I don't know if you said or no, that how can we find data that is in this repository? So how do you uh, get access to the data? So can you how can you perform a search? So should you perform the search directly on this
Yes, yes, yes.
repository, or
This
can
is
you?
a new service. We don't have a lot of data, but there is already data and very good examples. You can search for the data. So
Only inside the repository, so you need to browse, you need
yes,
to
yes, yes.
perform the
Yeah.
search
It's
inside.
a normal website with a search engine, and then if you find the metadata available, if you find something relevant, you can access the data if it is open. The metadata is open, have an open license, then the data may be restricted, closed, depends of the terms of
So
use.
if you search in Google, you don't retrieve anything
Yes, yes, yes. If you search
from.
in Google, you can see the metadata, and you can click in the record and see
Okay.
our record. Yes, yes, yes. You can see it.
Okay, and the unique identifier. So, for instance, if you want
Yes, for
to
example,
have a
let's
link
use
for
this.
the unique identifier for the
This
paper,
yes, yes.
how
This
do we do it?
yes. If you when you deposit the data in our repository, you will be able to register and to have a DOI. For like this
Okay.
example, they have deposit researcher from Department of Engineering. They deposit this data set and they have uh, a DOI for the data. It's here. This one.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Pedro, this is just like a dataverse, is it not?
This is a data first. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So it's like the biodata.
It's like the biodata. This is why I can highlight our repository in
Mhm.
order then for you to say, okay, use the biodata because it's similar to this one. But I
And it is
I can
more
demonstrate
tailored.
this
We
one.
wished at least.
We can demonstrate. I can demonstrate this because it's my. I have it. I have it. I have my knowledge. Okay, let's having this question from Inez in mind. Let's go to this second part. There are some slides here to just for you to check, but some highlights about the data that I didn't mention in the possibilities to deposit the publish data. I just want to highlight that when you publish or deposit data, okay, you put the files. You need to try to use the best effort to ensure open formats or common file formats. We know that sometimes this is quite almost impossible for some instruments, etc. Then to describe properly the data using metadata, generic metadata like the Dublin core, like Bruno mentioned, but also if the repository allows to you some more detailed metadata descripted, of course you can also attach some metadata for documenting the data, and then all the other documentation. So this is just a slide to highlight that we are not talking only about descriptive metadata and files and upload files, but we can also upload code books explaining different information, um, protocols, readme files with disclaimers. We can even software code, consent information. We can attach in the data set, so files of the data plus some other documentation that we should attach it to the data files. This is important to highlight that when we deposit data, it must be a comprehensive set of information with data and other documentation. Of course, this is a process. This is a learning process, not easy to do for all researchers. A data steward have here as an important role to explain that putting only a spreadsheet or a zip file with the images may not be fair. You need to document it properly and explain it properly. But so this is one of your roles here. This is important to highlight. Okay, I wanted just to put this slide. The other one is just for you to read. And you may have different access rights to this information. Let's go into now to examples. Okay, in Zenodo, a generic repository and a Dataverse repository. Okay, I'm using the example of Minho, but then Anna can point you to Biodata, as more or less is the same structure in terms of course, the policy and the workflows may be different, but the facilities are the same. A catch-all repository like Zenodo. Zenodo is a result of the Open Air project. It's a facility for Europe, for those that are involved in research in Europe. And there are a free service that you can use. There is you can register, you can deposit data and get DOIs for free, which is good. There are some interesting facilities like user statistics. You can get credit because there is quite easy to cite the data sets, at least to comply with the findable and the accessible principles, fair principles. For sure, Zenodo will ensure that at minimum. What is interesting to learn is that you can upload in Zenodo to 50 gigabytes per record. Okay, it's not per user or per collection. It's just you create a record, a data set, you describe it, and you upload files until 50 gigabytes, which is really good. Not sufficient for some, but quite sufficient for other kinds of research data that we want to publish and to link to a publication, etc.
Can I
yes.
just say that it's true that they have this limit, but if you just write to them and explain that you need to upload more data, they will increase your quota for that particular record. So they're very responsive on that.
Yes,
we use them. So
okay, Tiago, you are from, sorry?
I'm from the IGC, Instituto de Gulbenkian Ciência.
Okay, yes. Great, it's true. So this is hosted by CERN. The principle of Zenodo is something really interesting. They say that we do our best effort for the benefit of researchers. The best efforts sometimes have limitations. They are quite responsive, as Tiago said. So they are being funded by the European Commission. It was in FP7, then in Horizon Europe, in Horizon 2020, and now also within some open air projects, and also some EOSC, European Open Science Cloud related projects. But of course, it's not sufficient funding for all what they have, but they are in CERN, and in CERN they don't have so much problems with storing limitations, let's say. You can describe and you publish different kinds of research outputs, but I think for publications you are quite well served in Portugal, but for data I understand that no. But in institutions that can benefit from biodata, you have now a new service that you want to use. In the description, I just want to highlight that it's quite easy to attach a license, which is interesting for FAIR, and also identify the access right. You don't have a lot of possibilities, but you have 4. You can put it as restricted by a password, closed access, embargoed and open access. I will demonstrate in our Dataverse in Minho that you have an additional feature, call it guest book, that is quite interesting to comply with the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary. One interesting thing is that you can attach the grant, and the FCT grants are there. Unfortunately, not up to date, but almost. Not the last list of problems. Close. Anna, can you close the microphone of Bruno? Yes. Okay, thank you, Bruno. No problem. So it's good because people can use the node and can identify outputs from FCT projects. But can I highlight more the node as Tiago is here? Tiago can also demonstrate, but I think I'm usually I suggest the node because there are lots of institutions that they don't have a possibility to offer the solution for the researchers, and you can use it. One interesting solution that I usually advise is to create a community. Okay, the concept of community is equal to collection, sub repository, sub collection, community. So you can create a community for your project, for your research group, whatever, if you don't have, and then you can manage it. There are some limitations. There are in the pipeline some novelties about that. So you only have a curator, attach it to the collection. You can curate the information, and it's done. Let's give this example: the open air project. Let's say if you can gather all the information in this collection, publications, presentations, data sets, whatever, and you can you will have one person to curate the information inside this collection. You can have it for projects. There are all types of communities created here, even for journals. There are some journals that also use this. This is an interesting solution that you can use. So this is what I want to highlight to you. And that characteristic that Bruno also raised and I identify in the ways to deposit. So what you have in Zenodo is a generic metadata description, but in fact you can do several things inside Zenodo. So you can just start uploading a file limited to gigabit, limit to do 50 gigabytes. Then you can identify a specific collection. You just start typing the collection and you will identify, say, first fair project. You identify the project, then so several things. All the things are here. The ORCID, and then the licenses and the grants. The grants are here. If you type Fundação, no, Fundação here. Fundação is here, and then you start typing the name of the project or the research unit, if it is funded. You will see, you will find the project. So we did this work a long time ago. Now we are waiting for an update on that. Okay, Zenodo is a good solution, and even what they have quite interesting. Also, Tiago raised how responsive they are, but what they have is an interesting idea that you can create a collection. If later you have your own institutional repository, you can talk with us and we will ensure that we will transfer the data or the metadata. This is interesting. So you have this facility for the period that you don't have a facility in your institution. If you in 2 or 3 years you can play. It's even for aggregation processes, it's quite easy because you have an interface, an OIP image interface to communicate. There are different solutions, which is interesting. The other is Dataverse. Dataverse is based on Harvard. the Dataverse is a repository. Okay, just if I can explain properly. Metaverse Harvard is a solution, is the Harvard repository plus a solution like Zenodo to deposit and publish. Okay, and this simultaneously an open source software platform to create your own repository like Biodata did and like University of Minho did. Ines, yes. You have a question, Ines? No.
Yes, I had a question, but it's about Zenodo. Is
Okay.
how can you? So you said that, but maybe I can do my question in the end of this presentation.
Okay,
No?
okay. Feel free.
Sorry.
Okay, I will ask you. Okay, no problem. I'm finalizing. So, okay, Dataverse is a repository, as I mentioned. So Dataverse is a software, and this is a solution that Biodata use it and Minho use it. Okay, and Dataverse then is a community because it's an open source solution. It's quite interesting. So there you can see here from the map that there are different institutions using this software, even in Europe. What we have in Minho, I don't want to so I'm just presenting University of Minho repository as an example, okay, of an institution repository, an interesting solution. Usually we present it to share, to publish, and to manage. It's not a storage service, but it can help to manage the data to ensure good documentation, good practices. How? You will see one difference here. Look to the numbers here. 89 data sets. Okay, could you see this? Let me log out, and you will see 73. Okay, 73. This means that there are people uploading data, describing data, and keeping it just for them. Okay, now unfortunately it's not just for them because I'm sharing with you, but we keep it just in this group. They can keep it as a draft. They can keep it unpublished. Then can publish whenever they want, based on good practices. In fact, they can. I don't have a good example from life sciences. In fact, we only present the data repository. I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago to the research center from biology, engineering center, SEB to SEB.
Biological engineering. Yeah.
Biological engineering center. So thank you.
I was there.
Silvio, sorry. So we don't have a lot of users yet from SEB, but we will have it. We have I forget always. Yes, this is a good example. So this is from the archaeological research unit. What they are doing, you can see that is unpublished. What they are doing, this is why we are suggesting this to manage the data. So people can create data sets, upload files, documenting, progressing, enriching, and then at some point they are able to publish, to share it with the world. And this is what, for example, in this excavation they are doing. They are doing the work. They have started in Coa Park. They are putting here the files. Okay. Let's see it like this. It's good to see it because we will see that they have. I'm proud of these data sets because I don't know what they are doing, in fact, but I like because it's really a very good example to explain, to demonstrate the potential of having an institutional repository or having a biodata repository like you. So you can use it to manage, to properly document, put the data and prepare the data to share it with groups or with other persons or to publish with the world. In fact, what they are doing, they can, in this process, share the data, okay? Because they can point the other people to this data to share it in the group all the people from the research from Arthur Rupestre group, they have access to this. Okay, they are sharing the data with a specific group, and then they can publish later. Okay, and this is a very good example. I think it was clear for you to ensure this management part. But usually we say share and publish. The way that this works, let me check the time. It's Dataverse is the name of the software, but it's simultaneously the name of the repository and the name of the collection. So we create inside the repository dataverses, collections. Let's have it. Let's think about that as a collection, as a community, as a repository. Okay, a sub repository. Let's say you create the dataverse of Minho, and then inside the dataverse of Minho, like for this example, the archaeology unit. Okay, inside a dataverse, you put data sets. Okay, and inside data sets, like in this image here in the right, you create you upload files or code or documentation, like I stated in one of the previous slides. So to publish and share data. Okay, and with this dataverse, Minho dataverse, or I suppose biodata, you can have a DOI, you can have citation for credit of your data. You have some information about user stats. We have improved it a bit. We have installed a new feature that is related with an initiative, call it Make Data Count. Is a world initiative to ensure that we can we have generic statistics like downloads, but then at the level of the data set, this is the new. We have some data set metrics. We can have views, downloads, and citations. We are working on this. This is not perfect because we didn't migrate the previous downloads information. So we have this. I don't know, 2 weeks ago, we put it in production 2 weeks ago. But this is important. Set of files, you put the files, and maybe for example, this example, you have a methodological note and also then the file. Terms of use and versioning. What is interesting in the terms of use is that you have the possibility to create guest books, to have a different control. You can have the closed and the open and the embargoed, but then you can have a guest book that is, you create like a kind of form. People need to fill that form, presenting why they want to use the data, and then you give access to the data, or people get automatically the data, which is really interesting, an interesting feature for a better control. Of course, you can always have people doing filling the room with bad proposes the form, but this is for the best effort of science. And with this structure, flexible structure of dataverses, collections inside of collections, you can create, for example, a collection for a project. We only have a good example, a great example, publicly available. It is a project from the Research Education Center, that at the end of the project, they ask us to use this repository to store all the outputs, and in the final conference, they presented different reports, different outputs, but this collection with all they did the interviews and things like that. So with all the data from their project, they can like put the banner with the FCT logos as the following the requirements, and this is an interesting solution to have project outputs and funder identification. So what Dataverse is interesting is for to ensure a secure data management, as we have different access rights, is interesting. Effective sharing, as you can see. There is this versioning thing, so this is quite interesting. You can We have a good example here. Incêndios. Incêndios. Normally I use this example. So they have different, you can create different versions for different, so you can publish first version and then increase something in the data set, and you can say, okay, this is a minor version and you will have 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and or you can say it's a major version and you have 2.0 or 3.0. And it's interesting because data sets are live, no? So we can progress if it is like a kind of series. It's important. Long-term access and preservation, it depends of the institutional policies, but we will ensure that. Organization and compatibility with the funder requirements, with the funder policies, with institutional policies, etc. From my perspective, save time. The example I gave from the archaeological unit, I think it's very good. So you are preparing the data and already putting in the dataverse, and then you can easily publish when the time to publish. Increase research visibility. So you have a DOI, you have citation metadata, etc. You will be founded in Google Scholar, in different platforms, and meet the grant agreements easily, as I stated in this example from Edu Places. I think I already shared the examples that I wanted. There are some interesting features, like for example, there is one that is quite interesting, is this one, the private URL, that a researcher can put the data, I think I have a real example here. Let's see, not this one, but there are 2 or 3 examples, previous examples. I think this one, not sure. That they can what they deposit here, and they are in a process of submitting a paper, and they can yeah, this is the case. They did it already. So what they did is they create a private URL and publish, so they can share this private URL with the journal, with the reviewers, to access the data. Only those that have access to this link, they can check the data. And they did it. I don't know for which paper they are submitting, but they did it, and they can comply with the funder, with the publisher. They don't need to use the publisher facility. If it exists, they can use their own institutional repository and comply with the publisher policy. Ines,
Pedro?
now it's time. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know, how are you in your presentation? We are.
I'm finishing. I finished.
Oh, fantastic. So, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Ines, do you have?
Yeah, so maybe I can make a question. I already forgot the one about Zenodo, but I have another question. I'm really interested in this Dataverse. I already use it. We have it implemented in biodata, as Anna said, and we have like tailored Dataverse for plant data, for plant biological data. I found it very difficult to create samples because it's very time consuming, and you have to repeat the same operation several times, but this is another problem. So what I'd like to ask, you did some alterations about the downloads, about the usage. So the citations, the view, and the downloads.
Mhm.
So this is only for your repository in the University of Minho, or it's available in data?
No, it's a facility. It's a facility from the Dataverse. It's a kind of
Okay.
a plugin that you can install. It is make that account. Make that account is an international initiative. Start to be like a kind of pilot, but several other organizations have joined in this initiative, and so they create a kind of patch plugin for Dataverse to comply with Make That Account initiative. Make That Account is related with so
Okay, thank
more
you.
information in terms of uses of the data sets.
So, Pedro, we're getting a bit tight on schedule. You still have a second presentation to do about organizing.
I can share it. I have some things, but I don't need to. I can share it with the slides with the colleagues and or do it later if you want. I have slides here somewhere.
Okay, I'm not sure if we. I mean, we could extend a bit into lunchtime, but not
No.
much.
I don't want to.
Yeah, thank you, Pedro. I'll come back to you with specific questions if when I come to this part. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, so in terms of my presentation, I'm done. So I thought that it was quite important for me to detail the publication thing in the sharing, because I think we are missing that part in Portugal a bit, and in your specific area. Of course, there are other disciplinary tools that are being used by researchers, and I think they should continue to use those specific databases and data banks. But then when it comes to a facility, I think it's important if we can have institutional facilities or your repository, biodata facility. I think we should try to sell it. I don't know. So we have this meeting here that I think it's a good possibility, a good opportunity.